Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Mehmood with the news for this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Pakistan has strongly condemned the deliberate attempts to instigate communal violence against Muslims in India. At a press briefing in Islamabad, the Foreign Office spokesman said the protection and support of the perpetrators of such acts by the Indian authorities is reprehensible. Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said the rising incidents of hate crime and hate speech in India are the consequences of BJP's extremist Hindutva ideology. The US has warned Russia and China not to disregard the re-imposition of all UN sanctions on Iran. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington will sanction both the countries if they refuse to comply with the measures against Tehran. Earlier, US President Donald Trump directed Pompeo to notify the UN Security Council that Washington intends to restore UN sanctions on Tehran. China says the US has agreed to hold trade talks over the Phase 1 trade deal in the coming days. At a briefing, Commerce Ministry spokesperson Gao Feng said the talks will evaluate the progress made on the trade deal in the past 6 months. Gao's remarks come after US President Donald Trump postponed August 15 trade talks with China, citing its handling of the coronavirus. The US has recorded over 1,300 deaths overnight, raising the toll to over 173,000 with 5.5 million infections. While Brazil has reported more than 1,200 deaths and over 49,000 new COVID-19 cases in the past 24 hours. India sees highest single-day jump in COVID-19 cases with nearly 70,000 tested positive, taking the caseload to over 2.8 million, while 977 people died overnight. Pakistan continues to report a downward trend in COVID-19 cases and deaths as 8 people lost their lives while 513 tested positive in the past 24 hours. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 22.4 million people and claimed more than 786,000 lives. Israel says its tanks have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas military posts in retaliation to incendiary balloon attacks. No casualties have been reported so far. And in football, Bayern Munich beat Olympique Lyonnais by 3-0 to reach the finals of the Champions League at Estadio Jose Alvalade. Bayern will be looking for their 6th European crown when they face Paris Saint-Germain in the final on Sunday. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now for the news in detail. We start from Pakistan, which has strongly condemned the deliberate attempts to instigate communal violence against Muslims in India. At a press briefing in Islamabad, the Foreign Office spokesman said the protection and support of the perpetrators of such acts by the Indian authorities is reprehensible. Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said the rising incidents of hate crime and hate speech in India are the consequences of the BJP's extremist Hindutva ideology. He was referring to the blasphemous content posted on social media by the Indian extremists. Speaking on occupied Jammu and Kashmir, Chaudhry said India has turned the valley into the world's largest open prison. He said Islamabad welcomes Human Rights Watch's call for an independent investigation into the extrajudicial killings of Kashmiris. Chaudhry also said Pakistan supports two-state solution to the conflict between Israel and Palestine. The US has warned Russia and China not to disregard the re-imposition of all UN sanctions on Iran. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington will sanction both the countries if they refuse to comply with the measures against Tehran. Pompeo lamented European nations' decision to abstain from the UNSC vote over the arms embargo, saying it made the European people less safe. The Secretary of State will submit a complaint about Tehran's non-compliance with the 2015 nuclear deal in the Council. Earlier, US President Donald Trump directed Pompeo to notify the UN Security Council that Washington intends to restore UN sanctions on Tehran.
Today, I'm directing the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to notify the UN Security Council that the United States intends to restore virtually all of the previously suspended United Nations sanctions on Iran. It's a snapback, not uncommon.
The Security Council will have 30 days to adopt a resolution to extend the sanctions relief of Iran. Otherwise, the measures will automatically come into effect. Now, China says Hong Kong will suspend some legal cooperation with the US in response to its move to terminate 3 bilateral pacts with the city. At a briefing, China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian urged Washington to correct its mistakes over Hong Kong. Earlier, the US State Department terminated the agreements, expressing concern over Beijing's new security law in the territory. It said these agreements cover the surrender of fugitives, transfer of convicted persons, and tax exemptions from ship operations. Beijing has defended the law as necessary to restore order and preserve prosperity after months of violent anti-government protests last year. Now, the US has recorded over 1,300 deaths due to COVID-19 overnight, with the toll crossing 173,000 with over 5.5 million infections. While Brazil has reported more than 1,200 deaths and some 49,000 new cases in the past 24 hours. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 22.4 million people and claimed more than 787,000 lives. More in this report.
As news of vaccines being made across the world stokes hope for many, the coronavirus continues to claim thousands of lives each day. Brazil has expressed cautious optimism that the country's outbreak may be slowing down as the number of new deaths and cases reported dips after a July peak. While in the US, President Donald Trump has touted convalescent plasma as his latest coronavirus treatment.
But I've heard fantastic things about convalescent plasma. And I've heard numbers way over 50% success. And people are dying, and we should have it approved if it's good. And I'm hearing it's good. I heard from people at the FDA that it's good.
In Europe, despite reporting another post-lockdown peak in infections, French President Emmanuel Macron has ruled out reimposing national lockdown. Whereas Spain has issued orders for an outdoor smoking ban, nightclubs to shut, and a curfew on bars and restaurants to help slow the spread of COVID-19. While New Zealand reported 5 new confirmed cases as the nation battles a fresh outbreak in its biggest city of Auckland. In Australia, the second most populous state of Victoria has reported a small increase in the number of cases, raising hopes that the lockdown is yielding results.
It's too early, sadly. I know it's very frustrating, and we'd all love to know a clear blueprint every single day and we tick them off and move from one phase to another. We would love that, the notion, I'm sure Victorians would too, but the issue around the fact that this is not just wildly infectious, but it can be stubborn. It can sit there and be really difficult to extinguish or even to bring down to a much more sustainable number.
In Asia, mainland China reported 7 new imported cases with no domestic transmissions across the country. Meanwhile, South Korea has reported 288 more cases overnight.
India has reported the highest single-day jump in its COVID-19 cases, with nearly 70,000 infections being reported across the country. The jump in cases takes the country's caseload to over 2.8 million. The Health Ministry said 977 people died overnight, bringing the count to nearly 54,000. The ministry reported there are over 686,000 active cases in the country. It said the Maharashtra state remains the worst affected in the country, making up more than 37% of the country's cases. India is the third worst hit country from coronavirus pandemic after the US and Brazil. Meanwhile, Pakistan continues to report a downward trend in the new COVID-19 cases and deaths as 8 people lost their lives tonight. The Health Ministry says 513 people tested positive in the last 24 hours. The country's death toll has risen to 6,209, while the infections are nearly 291,000. The ministry says the number of active cases across the country is 11,945. It reported a recovery rate of over 93% across the country. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 127,000 infections, while Punjab has reported nearly 96,000 cases. Moving on, Israel says its tanks have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas military posts in retaliation to incendiary balloon attacks. No casualties have been reported so far. The Israeli military says positions of the Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam brigades were targeted in the raid. Tensions have risen for over a week as Israel continues to bomb the Gaza Strip, accusing Hamas of launching explosive balloons across the border. Israel has also closed the Karim Abu Salim goods crossing with the Gaza Strip. Now, US President Donald Trump says he expects Saudi Arabia will join the Israel-UAE deal known as the Abraham Accord. Speaking at a press conference, Trump said a lot of countries wanted to join the deal. Under the US brokered deal, Israel has agreed to suspend West Bank annexation for a complete establishment of diplomatic ties with the UAE. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia says it will not forge a diplomatic relationship with Israel until Tel Aviv signs a peace accord with the Palestinians. It added that Israel's unilateral moves with regard to settlements in the West Bank are hindering chances for peace in the Middle East. Lebanon's Hezbollah says it will not evaluate the verdict of a UN tribunal that convicted its member in 2005 killing of former Premier Rafiq al-Hariri. While addressing media, Hezbollah MP Hassan Fadlallah said the movement is not concerned about the verdict. Fadlallah said the group has never recognized the court and its stance has been further solidified by this new verdict. While the court found no evidence of direct involvement by the leadership of Hezbollah, the judges said the killing was clearly a politically motivated act of terrorism. The movement has been under intense scrutiny, as many allege its involvement in the port blast as well, which killed more than 180 people. Meanwhile, Turkey says it has killed 4 militants of the Kurdistan Workers Party in airstrikes during a counter-terrorist operation in northern Iraq. The National Defense Ministry said military operations were carried out in Gaza and Awasin regions. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapons caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. Yesterday, Ankara claimed to kill 2 PKK fighters during operations in the Zap region. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year terror campaign. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. The UN Security Council has condemned a mutiny in Mali and urged the military to immediately release all government officials. In an urgent meeting, the 15-member council asked the military to return to their barracks without any delay. The UNSC meeting was called to discuss the military coup and the detention of President Boubacar Keïta and Prime Minister Boubou Cissé. Mali's military coup leaders have sat down with the opposition to discuss ways of getting the government working. One of Mali's most influential power brokers, Mehmood, says he will also withdraw from politics following the recent developments.
The General Secretaries expressed their concerns in this delicate period in which there is no government in relation to the means, in relation to credit, the problems we face, and in relation to pending files. They have been pending since the government's resignation and which are still open. So we need to manage all this to move forward.
Well, the mutiny has drawn widespread international condemnation, while the African Union has suspended Mali's membership. Now, moving on, the UN Agency for Refugees says at least 45 migrants have died in the deadliest shipwreck of Libya so far this year. In a statement, it said 80 people were on board a vessel whose engine exploded off the coast of Savannah on Monday. The agency said 5 children were among the dead, while 37 survivors were rescued by fishermen. Both the UNHCR and the International Organization for Migration called for search and rescue efforts to be stepped up. U.S. Senator Kamala Harris has accepted the nomination for vice president on the third night of the largely virtual Democratic National Convention. Harris is the first black woman and Asian American on a major U.S. presidential ticket. Details in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic has forced the Democrats to abandon the cheering throngs, fanfare, and razzmatazz of the typical party convention. So they went with a virtual event of pre-recorded and live speeches in Philadelphia. Speaking at the convention, Kamala Harris assailed President Donald Trump's failure of leadership. She said President Trump's disastrous leadership has cost lives and livelihoods during the COVID-19 pandemic. She urged American voters to come together to elect Biden and beat Trump in the November 3rd presidential election.
We must elect a president who will bring something different, something better, and do the important work. A president who will bring all of us together, Black, white, Latino, Asian, Indigenous, to achieve the future we collectively want. We must elect Joe Biden.
Meanwhile, former U.S. President Barack Obama was the headline act of the night as he accused his successor of dealing with the presidency as a reality show.
Donald Trump hasn't grown into the job because he can't. And the consequences of that failure are severe. 170,000 Americans dead. Millions of jobs gone, while those at the top taken more than ever. Our worst impulses unleashed, our proud reputation around the world badly diminished, and our democratic institutions threatened like never before.
Obama said electing Joe Biden, his vice president and now the Democratic candidate for president, will ensure survival of American democracy. Biden will take on the Republican President Trump in presidential elections on November 3rd.
Moving on, Ukraine's presidential office says the country's armed forces will be withdrawn from 4 more locations on the eastern Donbass region. The statement comes after the trilateral contact group of Russia, Ukraine and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe held a video conference. President's office said 20 areas discussed at last year's Normandy 4 summits in Paris will also be cleared of mines. The statement said this will enable the Paris Agreement's articles to be realized more quickly. The OSCE's head of special missions, Yasser Halit-Sevik, said a ceasefire has been observed in eastern Donbass since July 27th. Russia and Ukraine have been at odds since Russia annexed Crimea after a controversial referendum in 2014. Now, South Korea's Green Cross Corps has received regulatory approval for phase 2 human clinical trials of its experimental COVID-19 plasma treatment drug. The company said the trials will test the safety and efficacy of the drug in 60 severe patients with underlying conditions like pneumonia. Its therapy is the country's first to enter phase 2 for coronavirus plasma treatment. Meanwhile, Mexico said it will carry out phase 3 testing of the Russian coronavirus vaccine. Elsewhere, Turkey is in talks with Russia, Germany and China about conducting phase 3 trials for coronavirus vaccines. Cuba will also start clinical trials next week of a potential vaccine called Sobirana 01 developed by its state-run Finlay Institute. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Mehmood Qureshi has left for China to attend the second round of the China-Pakistan Foreign Ministers Strategic Dialogue. The first meeting of the dialogue was held in March last year. Qureshi said his visit will prove to be a beneficial one for both countries. The dialogue is aimed at strengthening strategic relations between Islamabad and Beijing over a range of issues. During the meeting, both sides will discuss ways of strengthening cooperation, COVID-19 and regional and international issues. Qureshi is accompanied by senior officials, while the Chinese delegation will be led by Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Now in Pakistan, 14 people have died in torrential rains overnight in different parts of the most populated Punjab province. Rescue officials say several were injured in rains that devastated the central region of the province. They said 5 people were killed in Mandi Bahauddin after a fragile home's roof collapsed. The official said 4 others were killed in a similar incident in the eastern Lahore city. In Chakwal, 3 labourers lost their lives after being stuck in a coal mine during rains. 2 others died in Sheikhupura city. Hurricane Genevieve brushed the southern tip of Mexico's Baja California peninsula as 2 people drowned in heavy seas. The U.S. National Hurricane Center said a hurricane warning was in effect for the resort of Los Cabos and the town of Todos Santos. It warned that rainfall from Genevieve may lead to life-threatening flash flooding and mudslides in the area. The storm is also expected to produce swells which are likely to cause life-threatening surf and rip current conditions. The National Met Service reported the center of the hurricane is located 75 kilometers southwest of Cabo San Lucas town. It said the hurricane has now weakened to Category 1 storm. Meanwhile, astronaut Chris Cassidy managed to capture the storm from the International Space Station. In the United States, lightning strikes have sparked dozens of wildfires in Northern California, burning dozens of structures and forcing thousands to flee their homes. More details in this report.
California was hit by nearly 11,000 lightning strikes in 72 hours, sparking 367 fires. Nearly 24 of the wildfires are major, as the state is also suffering from a record heat wave. U.S. authorities say the pilot of a helicopter fighting fires in California has died after his aircraft crashed. Governor Gavin Newsom has declared an emergency as authorities battle hundreds of blazes.
We are experiencing fires, the likes of which we haven't seen in many, many years. The totality, when you consider 367 active fires that we are aware of all across the state of California, and again, when the smoke starts clearing, the conditions avail themselves with all the reconnaissance that's being done all across the state.
A group of fires about 20 miles east of Palo Alto more than doubled in size overnight and is now burning over 85,000 acres. Governor Newsom has requested 375 fire engines from out of state, with Arizona, Nevada, and Texas sending assistance.
We have requested what we refer to as an EMAC, and this is our emergency assistance program with states all across the western United States. We've now requested 375 EMAC, meaning engines, to come from other states.
Officials went door to door overnight in a frantic effort to clear homes. Thousands of people flee their homes in major cities of California, including San Francisco, after several quick-moving wildfires swept into the region.
China says the U.S. has agreed to hold trade talks over the Phase 1 trade deal in the coming days. At a briefing, Commerce Ministry spokesperson Gao Feng said the talks will evaluate the progress made on the trade deal in the past 6 months. Gao's remarks come after U.S. President Donald Trump postponed August 15 trade talks with China, citing its handling of the coronavirus. The U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, and Vice Premier Li He was scheduled to conduct a 6-month review of the trade agreement last week before it was indefinitely postponed. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows also confirmed that no new high-level talks were scheduled between Washington and Beijing. The White House says it will be unusual for the U.S. Treasury to get a cut from the sale of video sharing app TikTok's U.S. operations. White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow said U.S. President Donald Trump probably wants to deny China some of the proceeds from the sale. Kudlow was unsure if any funds will end up in the Treasury, saying the proposal itself is unusual, but Trump has his own opinion on these matters. Last week, Trump ordered ByteDance-owned TikTok to divest its U.S. operations within 90 days in a bid to pressurize Chinese firms over data security concerns. Trump suggested the U.S. government should get a substantial portion of the proceeds from the sale. Recently, the Oracle Corporation expressed an interest in procuring the app's operations in North America, Australia and New Zealand. Now, Australia's flag carrier Qantas has reported an annual loss of over $1.4 billion as it deals with the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. The Australian flag carrier Group Chief Executive Alan Joyce-Moss says trading conditions are the worst in the airline's 100-year history. He said the coronavirus pandemic has devastated the airline industry with significant underlying loss expected in the next financial year. The firm said around 4,000 of its 6,000 planned job cuts are expected to be finalized by the end of next month, and recovery will be choppy. As the country's international borders remain closed, Qantas says it's not anticipating a resumption of international flights until late 2021. The global airline industry has been hit hard as travel restrictions have been imposed around the world. American tech giant Apple has become the first U.S. company to reach a $2 trillion market value. The company had previously become the first to hit $1 trillion in March 2018. The iPhone maker is followed by other tech companies including Amazon, Microsoft and Google parent Alphabet. The shares of Apple have doubled from the lows of March, lifting Chief Executive Tim Cook's net worth to $1 billion. Apple's rise comes in the wake of a broader rally in technology shares as employees across the U.S. shift to working from home. European stocks have retreated after the U.S. Federal Reserve officials said COVID-19 will weigh heavily on the country's economic recovery prospects. The pan-European stock 600 is down by more than 1% as all sectors and major bourses slid into negative territory. Frankfurt's DAX fell by more than 1.5%. London's FTSE 100 traded over 1.5% lower. Paris' CAC 40 is also down. Earlier, stocks in the Asia-Pacific retreated in overnight trade after China announced it will keep lending rate unchanged. In football, Bayern Munich beat Olympique Lyonnais by 3-0 to reach the final of the Champions League at Estadio José Alvalade. Bayern will be looking for their 6th European crown when they face Paris Saint-Germain in the final on Sunday. Lyon's Memphis Depay called Toko Ekabe missed the early chances before Bayern grabbed the lead through Serge Gnabry in the 18th minute. Gnabry struck again in the 33rd minute as he started and finished the move that involved Robert Lewandowski and Ivan Perisic. Lewandowski made sure of the result with a strike in the 88th minute as the French side were left to rue most missed chances in the second half. The German side will be looking to become the first team to win the Champions League with a 100% record in the tournament this season. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.